Okay, this is Psalm 20, starting in verse 1. May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of God of Jacob defend you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and strengthen you out of Zion. May he remember all your offerings and accept your burnt sacrifice. May he grant you according to your heart's desire and fulfill all your purpose. We will rejoice in your salvation, and in the name of our God we will set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. And Father, we thank you for such encouraging words. And we ask that you'd help us to proceed through our day knowing that you are indeed there. And may we look to you always for everything that we need, from relationship to understanding to truth to wisdom to strength to salvation, in all situations. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, well, so last time we were started in chapter 31, and depending upon what your Bible says, it'll have like a subheading of Jacob returns home or something like that. And while the Bible spends a lot of time talking about the life of Jacob, and you can honestly say that all of those chapters are important. In chapters 31, 32, and 33, I think we start to see a huge change in Jacob in terms of his life and his growth. And so these chapters are really very important relative to Jacob and what's going on. And you can say, well, why is all of that? And I think it could be. Don't quote me on this, but maybe, just maybe, it's because Jacob is slowly having to come face to face with the reality he's not in charge. He just isn't. And bit by bit, God is revealing that to him, and that it's really not him. That by himself, in his own right, he keeps getting himself into trouble, and it's a slow growing realization that it's God that's getting him out. God is protecting him, and God is providing for him. And one of the things that's interesting as we go through and we think about it from that perspective is to see how slow it takes, how long it really takes for Jacob to get there. And I don't want to pick on Jacob because, like I think I said last time, the more we study Jacob's life, the more I realize I'm a lot more like Jacob than I maybe want to admit, and a lot more like Jacob than I am like Abraham. And as we go, we're going to keep talking about, even though we're done studying Abraham's life and Isaac's life, we're going to look at how things have changed from Abraham's to Isaac's to Jacob's life, and then down to his kids. Okay. Well, last time it kind of starts with Jacob overhearing Laban's sons, and do you remember what they were saying about Jacob?
That he stole everything from their father.
He did. That's right. That's what they're saying, right? Is that he's taken our dad's wealth and he's made it his. And in essence, remember we said that. Well, that's right. I mean, these are Laban's herds, and the deal is the speckled, the striped, whatever are Jacob's, the solid colors, with the exception of the black lambs. Those are all Laban's, and all of a sudden, the herd is producing, primarily speckled, spotted, and all of those, and it's like the herd is slowly becoming Jacob's because of this deal.
And doesn't Laban go keep changing, like with the more speckled, and he says, oh no, the speckled are mine. Mm-hmm. And then the all brown, he goes, oh no, all the all brown are mine. He keeps changing it.
Somehow, he's doing that, and yet God is out, planning on every stage of the game, and it doesn't change anything. Jacob's herds are increasing dramatically, and Laban's just are not. And when Jacob hears this, it's not long afterwards that God says, hey, it's time to return home. And so Jacob realizes that, remember, and he starts to talk to his wives about it, and he tells them what, your dad, what's
changing my wages.
Well, you got that, but what's Laban's attitude towards Jacob?
He's mad, and Jacob says he's used us all and deceived us all, so we gotta go.
Yeah, and of course we talked about the fact that it's really Laban hasn't changed at all. It's just that Jacob's not creating wealth for him anymore, so he doesn't, he's ticked off at Jacob. It's okay when he prospers greater from Jacob's work than Jacob does, but when it turns around, now it's not okay for him. And we mentioned about the fact you can't see that without thinking back to the dream that Jacob had when he left the promised land in the first place, where God said, hey, I'll be with you, I'll protect you, and I'll bring you back safely. And so all of that stuff has come to pass. It's God's time now for Jacob to return home. And it corresponds, as I say, with Jacob getting really wealthy and Laban's attitude changing towards him and everything else. And as they're getting ready to leave, you guys both said it, right? He talks to his wives and they agree, hey, their dad has cheated them as much as he's cheated Jacob, that they have nothing from, all that they, that Jacob has done, that they should have been benefiting somewhat too, and stuff like that. And then what was the last thing that Rachel did right before they left?
Idols, his pagan god statues, and we talked about because she believed in them, or she just wanted to piss him off, or a combination of both. Yeah,
and we don't know, and we'll come back to that, probably not today, but later, which is why I bring it up. So they decide that they're leaving. Jacob comes up essentially with this plan that he's going to get everything ready. And if you remember in chapter 31, verse 19, Laban goes off to shear his flock, which is going to be 2 and 3 days of very hard work and typically partying at the end of it. So Jacob figures, hey, this is the opportunity, this is the time. At the end of verse 19, Rachel takes the household idols, and then they start to go. So why don't we pick up in verse 20? Maya, will you read 20 through 23 for us?
Sure. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, and crossing the river, he headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him at the hill of the country of Gilead.
Thank you. And Marie, how about 24 through 28?
But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I may have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing.
Maya, will you read, let's say, 29 through 32?
Sure. I had the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, be careful and not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you've gone off because you long to return to your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? How far did you say to go?
Just through 32.
Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods.
Okay. Well, let's go back and start at verse 20 and go into a little detail now. So, notice what happens verse.
They're saying
What?
they're saying that he ran away, but God told him to leave.
Yeah, but
somebody leaves. So is he really running away or just doing what God said?
well, look at verse 20. What's it say? Jacob deceived Laban.
Jacob left deceitfully instead of just telling him I'm out of here.
See, God told him to leave. Okay, and this is a really important point. God tells him that it is time to leave, and Jacob obediently leaves. That's great. Okay, but the way he does it is sinful.
He was supposed to, because I just figured he didn't tell the father because he's ticked off at us.
Well,
wow.
Sure, and Jacob doesn't. So first of all, let's face it, Jacob doesn't fully trust God, at least not at this point. And so I mean, because God told him to leave, and he's had more than ample opportunity to see that God tells him to do something, God will protect him and make sure it happens. Okay, and so Jacob just is afraid. We're going to see that. We just read it really quickly. We're going to come back to it in verse 31. Okay, and certainly Laban has been absolutely terrible to Jacob. Okay, but like I say, Jacob knows he's under God's care.
So he should have to leave without saying anything.
Yeah, and by the way, who is Laban? Well, he's Jacob's father-in-law. He's the father of Jacob's wives, and he's the grandfather of Jacob's kids. Now, would you want your kids to leave like that?
Yeah.
No. So, what Jacob did, you cannot honestly say that he was honoring Laban or trusting God by being, straightforward and saying, look, I've talked to you about this once before. It's not clear to me anymore that this deal is working out for you. Maybe it's time to end it. And I miss my family, and I'm taking my kids and my wives, and we're out of here. And that would have been a reasonable way to do it, right? Yet he doesn't do that. And what's interesting about this is that he's been, we're going to see, he's been there with Laban for many years. Okay. and he's been cheated a whole bunch. He's been taken advantage of, and yet God has seen fit to prosper Jacob. Every time Laban's tried to do it, while it didn't maybe feel that way at first, it's worked out great for Jacob, right? And yet here, when it's time to leave, what does Jacob actually do? He resorts back to his deceitfulness. He resorts back to his normal ways. You see, we know from the beginning, right from the conception in his birth, we're told that he's a deceiver, that he's always trying to latch on to something else. And we saw it in his interactions with his brother. We saw it in interactions with his father. We've seen it all along. And notice that here Jacob returns to his naturally sinful, deceitful ways. This is something that's deep within Jacob. He just is a natural deceiver. And how hard it is sometimes for us to overcome these, because all of us have these kind of tendencies. Now in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 and 4, Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses." And some translations will have, instead of fortresses there, strongholds. And every one of us has some deep tendencies, some strongholds, some natural inclinations of us that are sinful in their basic ways, that are so very hard to get over. And no matter where we are in our walk with God, particularly in times of stress or difficulties, we can resort to those if we don't focus on God. And here, Jacob gets told by God, hey, it's okay to leave, it's time to leave, I want you to leave. But nowhere really in here is he focusing on God as he prepares to leave. There's no indication of it. He mentions God a couple of times to his wives, but it's not. We don't really see Jacob doing this in a godly way. He's not praying about it or anything else. He resorts to doing things in his own way. Okay, which is one of the things that Jacob has been doing all his life. He resorts to getting, the blessings his own way. He resorts to getting the birthright his own way. He resorts to manipulating things his own way. He's always trying to do things his own way. He goes up there and tries to impress Rachel with his strength rather than letting God say, hey, is this the right woman? Or, all of those kinds of things. This is a really important lesson for us. It's not just about obedience to God. It's about how we obey God. Okay? God tells us that he has certain expectations for us. And in the New Testament, we're blessed to see and to be able to read that God tells us about what our behavior is supposed to look like. We're supposed to look like Christ. We're supposed to represent Jesus to others. Okay? We're supposed to walk in a Christian way, in a way that represents God. It's not just about obedience, it's how we do it. Okay? And God, in his infinite wisdom, gives us a huge amount of freedom to decide how to obey him. Okay? And this is where we get to develop and grow and show who we are. And show what God has done in us. Now, Jacob's concerns about Laban are well founded, okay, and everything else. The problem is, it's not that he misunderstands the problem or the issue, or Laban's hatred for him or anything like that. He gets it pretty much right on the head. Maybe even he not enough. Okay, it's not that he understands it. It's just that he doesn't trust God. In other words, he doesn't take into consideration the fact that God is on his side. Like I say, he's still trying to do things in his own right, and there's a powerful lesson there for us. Okay, when God, or when we know that we're supposed to do something, or we know what's right and what's wrong, it's not just how we do it. It's not just what we do. It's how we do it. And do we trust in God to, that doesn't mean we should do stupid things. We should think them out. But we should also be talking to God about them. And Jacob doesn't do that. So, verse 21, Jacob flees with all that he has, and he arose and crossed the Euphrates River. That's a big step. The Euphrates River is kind of like a demarcation line. So it's like a statement that he is truly committed and he's on his way. Okay? And notice what it says after that. And he set his face towards the hill country of Gilead. In other words, he's determined to get to this hill country of Gilead. Okay? Now, remember, he's exceedingly wealthy at this point. So how fast do you think he's going to travel?
I guess not that fast. He's probably got a huge caravan.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of herds and everything else. And he's got 11 kids, and not all of them, or well, 12 kids that we know of, 11 boys, not all of them are very old. He's got wives and, and servants and all this kind of stuff. So he's going to be going slow, okay? But he's determined to go. And, I think it's pretty clear that what he's done is he's picked this time where he knows he's going to get a 3-day head start, because he knows sheep shearing is going to take a while and they're going to be partying. And so he's on his way. Verse 22, and it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. Then he, verse 23, that he took his kinsman with him and pursued him. A distance of 7 days' journey. We'll get to that in a minute. So probably what happens is Laban comes back from sheep shearing and says, hey, where's Isaac and all the herds and everything else? And they find out, well, he's left. Okay, and so Laban probably figures this out, finds out about it when he comes back. And when it says he took his kinsmen with him, who are those kinsmen? Who do you think these people are?
I guess his sons.
His sons, for sure. What else?
His workers.
Well, it could be. And I'm sure that there's some truth to that. Kinsmen kind of implies brothers too, relatives. So I think he's got other family up there besides just his sons. By now it's probably nephews and stuff like that. But the point is he's basically coming with everybody he can. Okay. So the word itself means brothers and relatives, and so Laban comes prepared with basically a small army. Okay, and I think it's pretty safe to conclude that his intentions are not good here. Now, it takes him 7 days to catch up to Jacob. So Jacob's made it actually a fairly long way. He's probably more than halfway back to home. The hills of Gilead, we don't know exactly where he is, but he's probably somewhat just a little north of Gilead in the hill country up there as you're coming into the promised land. Okay, and he's made it a long way. And it has taken Laban 7 days to catch up with him, I think in part because Laban's got a pretty sized group of people with him too, although he doesn't have herds to drive and kids and women and things like that. What do you think Laban's attitude has been like as he's been chasing Jacob for 7 days?
Oh, he probably gets madder and madder by the minute. Because, when that's what you're focused on, you think about it, and then you drive yourself into a stinking frenzy.
Yeah, I don't think he's I don't think he's getting mellow as he chases him. I mean, he does keep going. So, if Jacob was concerned about how Laban felt about him before he left, well, now he really should be concerned, right? I think honestly sometimes I think that Jacob probably just assumed Laban wouldn't follow him that far. That he just wouldn't keep coming. In other words, I think he underestimated just how pissed Laban is. Okay. Now,
well, and plus Jacob didn't know about the idols too.
Well,
Yeah,
Jacob doesn't know about the idols too.
He didn't know that he had that.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point.
Incentive to track him down and
Yeah.
get his stuff back.
Yeah. So in verse 24, everything changes. God came to Laban the Aramean. Well, it's equivalently transferred Syrian sometimes. In a dream of the night, and said to him, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob, either good or bad." Now, that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, here we are. Jacob's in a world of hurt, and he's got a real predicament about to happen. And what happens? God intervenes. Now I can pretty safely conclude that if Laban really didn't mean harm to Jacob, he just wanted to say goodbye, probably God wouldn't have intervened. Okay, so it's another reference to the fact that Laban really does mean ill will towards him. But it's kind of a classic story, because think about it. We just got done saying that the whole reason this is kind of happening really is because Jacob didn't trust God to take care of things with Laban and leave in the right way. And yet now what has God done?
He's protected Jacob.
Yeah, he's shown up basically to clean up Jacob's mess. Isn't it interesting?
And it's interesting that he didn't tell Laban, turn around and go home and don't you dare.
We're going to come to that. Hold that thought. That's a really good point.
Because Laban's not completely wrong either.
So. And then think about, of all the different ways, I'm going to pull that string just a little bit. Of all the different ways that God could have intervened, he chooses to do it in a dream. See, God has all kinds of tools available to him. And we tend to forget this. When we're thinking about God, we think about like things that we think God could do to save us or help us or get us out of a problem or something like this. And we very seldom, well, I don't think we ever have a true appreciation for just how much flexibility, how many options God has. And so, if you're Jacob, what do you think Jacob's praying? Oh, God, don't let him come. Oh, God, let his horse get crippled or something like that so he can't follow. Or, whatever it is, right? I'll bet that was, if Jacob is thinking it, I'm guessing Jacob wasn't praying for God to come to him, to Laban in a dream. And then to your point, Marie, what does he tell Laban? He says, hey, be careful how you speak to this guy. Doesn't tell him to go back. Doesn't tell him to do anything like that. He just says, be careful. Now, of course, at this moment, Jacob doesn't know that this is going on. God often intervenes in ways we would never have guessed. And a lot of times he's doing it before we even know. See, Jacob doesn't know that this is happening to Laban. Okay? Jacob is really worried. And yet, God's got everything in control. And isn't that just the way things tend to work? We worry about stuff not recognizing all the tools, all the things, all the flexibilities, all the options God has, and without realizing God's already working it out. God intervenes here in a way that Jacob would never have guessed. And probably if we were writing this story, we wouldn't have written it this way either. It turns out Jacob actually had nothing to worry about, because even though he didn't trust God and leave in the right way, God wasn't going to be unfaithful. God told him, I'll bring you back safely. And God told him it was time to go. So what is God really doing here?
Keeping his word.
That's right. Jacob didn't trust God to watch over him and to keep his word. And the message to us is, do we? God told us the same thing, that he would watch over us, he would never leave us, and he would never forsake us. So, what are we worried about? Now, he tells Laban something really interesting. First it says, be careful. The idea here is literally take heed to yourself, be on your guard. In other words, you know what? Protect yourself, Laban. Don't say the wrong thing. What does it remind you of? Remember when Abraham is down with in the Philistine area, and the Philistine king Abimelech takes Sarah, Abraham's wife. It's all the way back in chapter 20. Remember, God warned Abimelech in a dream. In fact, it's in chapter 20, verse 3. But God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night and said to him, Behold, you are a dead man, because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is married. And then a few verses later, in verse 7, he says, Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you don't restore her, know that you surely will die, you and all who are yours. Now, when God did that in chapter 20 to Abimelech, did he force Abimelech to give Sarah back to Abraham?
No.
No, not really, did he? He did what? He let Abimelech make up his own mind. And notice he does the same thing here with Laban. God has the power to stop Laban in his track. I mean, look, if he wanted to, he'd just kill Laban. But he doesn't. Okay? He's got all kinds of ways to do it. And yet, he uses the same approach that we've already read about. He comes to Laban in a dream. What is God really doing? He's letting Laban know what he's up against. He's not up against Jacob. He's up against God. And then God lets Laban make his own choice. You think God's worried about what choice Laban's going to make?
No.
No. I mean, couldn't God, if Laban decides after God talks to him, I'm still going to go ahead and I'm going to go over there and I'm going to kill the guy. Couldn't God just open up a rift in the ground so Laban can't get across it to Jacob?
Yes.
Squash him like a bug, fall into quicksand, a tree falls on him. I mean, think about it. You know, birds come out of the sky and start pecking at him. And, I mean, any number of things could happen. God is not concerned or threatened by giving free choice to Laban. He allows him to make his own decision. It doesn't present a problem to God because God is sovereign. But in this way, God allows Laban to demonstrate his nature in how he feels about God. And when we think about that, it actually explains Jacob. God told Jacob it's time to leave. He doesn't tell him, now look, I know you don't get along with your father-in-law, but do not be disrespectful to him. God gives the decision up to Jacob. And so we see Jacob's nature. And God does the same thing here with Laban. Now it's interesting that Laban is going to listen to God. Okay? Why? Because in the end, Laban's what?
I think he's afraid.
He's afraid of God. I think there's no doubt about it. He said the last chapter that he knew God was prospering him because of Jacob. So he knows God is taking care of Jacob. And if he's prospering him, then he knows God's got a lot of power. See, this is actually God's natural approach, his normal approach for dealing with man. God doesn't normally intervene unless he has to. And then we see that even when he does, he tries to give us choice. Okay? If you think about it, isn't that exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden?
Mm-hmm.
He warned Adam and Eve, don't eat from that tree. And then he lets them make their own decision. And wasn't that exactly what happened in the chapters afterwards leading up to the flood? He said, okay, you want to decide what's good and evil for yourself? You want to make those decisions? You think you can do that? Okay, make your decisions. And God only intervened when it got down to Noah as being the single last righteous person left. See, God is going to let us individually and collectively show who we are because it's part of his plan. Remember when we first started in Genesis, I told you that there'd be some really overwhelming, consistent themes that we see. And one of them is we would see the fallen nature of man. And the other one was we'd see God's nature. God has given Laban a chance to obey him. And it's still God's way today. He gives us a chance to obey and to decide how to obey. Now, when God tells him either good or don't say anything to him, either good or bad, that kind of sounds surprising at first, doesn't it? God is basically warning Laban, do not interfere with my plans. That's essentially what he said. Now, he didn't go into this level of detail, but we know that Jacob's leaving because God told him to. Okay, so when he says don't speak good things to Jacob, what he's saying is don't lure him back. Don't make him another one of your sweetheart deals where you're going to cheat him right away. And we think back about how did this whole herding thing come about? Well, Jacob went to him and said, hey, it's time for me to go home. I've worked for your daughters and everything else. And then he gets into this sweetheart deal of, well, I'll work another few years and get wealthy. God's telling Laban, do not do that again. Do not lure him back and do not threaten him. He's telling Laban, and I doubt Laban actually gets it, but essentially he's telling Laban, don't mess with my sovereign plans. Okay? Or else. It's kind of this hint, right? So God has this message for Laban, and Laban, interestingly enough, fears God and chooses not to defy him. Yet he doesn't fear him enough to follow him. It's a really interesting phenomenon. He hears God. He's not going to cross God. So he knows God is powerful, and he fears him, and he's not going to take his chances. Yet he doesn't fear him enough to get down on his knees or to confess or apologize or anything else.
That's really sad.
It really is. And it's no different today. It's really hard for us to understand. Okay, yet we've all done this. Before we accepted the Lord, okay, we've all been like Laban. Or we've been like Jacob, knowing about God, but not really knowing God, not really trusting. One of the messages that we see in these chapters, particularly when we talk about Jacob, but we see it in Laban too, is just how much it can take to get a non-believer to finally believe that God is God and to start to act that way. I mean, sometimes, if you think about it, it's amazing it ever really happens. And that's what we see here is the stubbornness of Laban's heart. Okay?
I was going to say his heart's hardened.
His heart's hardened, isn't it? And it's not God who hardened it, it's Laban. And God is giving him yet another chance, even though God knows he's not going to change. He's allowing Laban to prove who he is. And it is sad. So verse 26, let's finish the thought in 25. So Laban caught up with Jacob, and he pitches his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen camped all around in Gilead. So, Jacob is right there. I mean, they're like close to each other. Verse 26, and Laban said to Jacob, what have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword? Well, what's the first thing that Laban says to Jacob? Well, he accuses him of deceiving him. Now that part's correct, but it's terribly ironic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The deceiver is complaining that Jacob, another deceiver, has deceived him. Now he's not correct in that his daughters, Jacob's wives, they weren't stolen. Jacob didn't take them away forcibly.
They wanted to go too.
That's right. Okay. That's exactly right. So what does it tell you about Laban's comprehension of reality?
There's none. It's like Peter.
He doesn't understand what a jerk he is.
I mean, he kept Jacob captive for how many years, and now he's accusing him of
yeah,
taking away the.
That's right.
By the sword.
And Jacob's going to make it really clear to him. He's going to be pretty blunt to him about it before we're done with this chapter. But the word here, deceive, is ganab, and it means to steal or to carry away. The idea is often to do it in of course, a deceptive way, to steal by stealth. Okay? And that's what Laban is accusing him of, having stolen his daughters by stealth. And yet, he gave them to him in a deal. He made the deal, right? And you know, it's interesting, and of course he's going to admit it in a second, but right now, right here, you got to start to be thinking to yourself, what's Laban really worried about? Why did Laban really chase Jacob?
He wanted his wealth.
He wanted his what?
Wealth.
Yeah. Jacob is gone with all of the hurt. Now we're going to find, I mean, he didn't take any of Laban's. He only took his own. Okay, we've already read that he took everything that was his and he left and he fled. So what is Laban been? Laban has been cheating Jacob, and Laban is still holding out hope that he's going to get all of these herds back. See, he sees Jacob as what? Opportunity. When you walk into the cheater's house or into the cheater's business, he sees what? Opportunity. When you walk into a casino, what do they see? Your wallet, right? Even though Laban's been losing lately, God's been outsmarting him with the way the herds have been reproducing. Laban hasn't given up hope. You know, and then there's the idols too. Is he more concerned about the livestock and the idols, or is he more concerned about his daughters and his grandkids?
Well, if they had left with just the clothes on their back, he probably wouldn't. Who knows if he would have taken them or not.
So I think that's a great point. I suspect that's true. Right? All right. Well, and we'll see more evidence of it as we go. Verse 27. Why did you flee secretly and deceive me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy, with songs, with timbrel, with lyre? Okay.
That's hilarious. He said, "Boy, I could have given you a going away party if you had told me."
Man, I'd have gone crazy. I'd have had a band there, and we'd have partied and had a great time and everything else. Now,
That's funny.
120 years ago, Laban sent Rebekah off with Abraham's servant. And he did indeed send her off with prayer and blessing. That's after they tried to keep her there. After they tried to, remember we talked about
see how much more they could get.
How much more they could get. And there were no songs and there were no celebrations. There weren't any then. And the clear evidence is that Laban or Laban's family heritage is going from bad to worse, not better. There's no reason to suspect that Laban would really have done that. What is Laban doing? He's lying. Okay? Why did you flee secretly, deceive me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy and songs and timbrel and lyre? He wouldn't have sent him away because Jacob was still in opportunity. Jacob's doing all this free work for him, and now the worm is turned, and now and he's still hoping he can get the cattle and everything back. Verse 28, and did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly. Well, maybe he's done foolishly, maybe not in terms of the way he left. But if Jacob's done foolishly, it's because he didn't trust God, not because he didn't have a better relationship with Laban. It's not because he's done foolishly because he didn't trust God, not because he didn't trust Laban. So we go on, verse 29. It is in my power to do you harm. The God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. What's Laban saying?
He's told him why he's not going to crush him.
Okay, but what else is he saying?
God gave him a warning.
Okay, but he starts with a threat. What was Laban's clear intention?
Don't tell him good or bad. So he's saying
no, Laban's intention. It's in my power to do you harm. What was he really planning to do?
Kill him and
take everything.
Yeah.
Kill him and take everything, probably. At least to do him harm. But God. But the God of your father. See, Laban immediately resorts to threats and the mention of the fact that he has superior numbers. The only reason he doesn't do it is because of God. Laban tips his hand. He did indeed intend evil for Jacob. Jacob did understand the situation and the relationship with Laban properly. But God's warning was sufficient. We see here that Laban is really afraid of God. He's not going to cross God. Okay? And he's not going to challenge him on this. God has protected Jacob. And you got to wonder, did Jacob hear that? Did Jacob hear that part? Yeah, I was coming down here to do you dirt. I was going to take everything back. I'm going to leave you up to your neck in the sand or something like that and let the animals go after you. But your God stopped me.
But then right there by him making that threat is he's going against what God told him. Don't tell him anything good or bad.
I only told him what he had intended. He's not going to do it. That's so I think that's a fair thing. He's not going to do it, But then what's he say right after this? Verse 30, now you have indeed gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. Laban knows, okay? But why did you steal my gods? Wow. Laban is mad because of the gods that they stole.
Isn't he also mad because of losing wealth and his
I think so too. We saw that right up front in verses 1 and 2, right? But we see here Laban's real intent and his motive. Okay, the first part of the motive was in verse 1 that Jacob's getting wealthy and Laban's not. Jacob's much more wealthy now. Laban can't handle it. He wants all the wealth back. Okay, and now the stolen gods, and so I think it's a pretty easy conclusion here. Laban doesn't have a whole lot of concern about his daughters or his grandkids. Not only that, think about the stupidity of this statement. You stole my gods. What kind of gods can be stolen? I mean, don't you see God's sense of humor here?
Yeah.
What kind of gods are these? What kind of idols? What are they? What are they if they can be stolen? You gotta wonder. Does Laban realize what he's saying? Oh yeah, man, I need these gods. I need them to help me tell the future. I use them for divination. I honor them and everything else, and you stole them. But they're going to take care of me. Well, why didn't they warn you, Laban, that Jacob was, or that Rachel was going to steal them? Interesting. Verse 31. Then Jacob replied to Laban and said, because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. Well, sure looks like I said, Jacob's fears were well founded. But he clearly discounted God's word. And this is right after Laban has told him, the only reason I'm not going to do this is because of your God. Okay? And again, at the beginning of this chapter in verse 3, last week we looked at the fact that God had told Jacob, when you leave, I'll be with you. Okay? And so once again, it's, this clear message to us of, do we trust God? Do we really hear his promises, and do we trust him? On verse 32 it goes on, Jacob responds to him, and he says, the one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, okay, point out what is yours among my belongings and take it for yourself. But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the idols.
So is he going to kill Rachel?
Well, we'll see how it turns out.
I haven't read ahead, as you can tell.
Yeah. Jacob makes what's an incredibly rash statement, doesn't he? Jacob, without knowing anything about what's going on, he didn't take them, so he presumes nobody did. Jacob commits that anyone who's taken these idols will die. Now, he's just heard from Laban himself that the only reason I'm not going to hurt you is because of your God.
Oh, so maybe he's saying that maybe he knows that God will protect him even if he says something stupid like that?
I don't think so. I think he should just shut up. He just saw that God's in charge and God's taking care of this. Why does he have to say anything? Why doesn't he just let God? But this is Jacob. Jacob now is going to start proclaiming his innocence. Oh, I haven't done anything. It's all you. That's the way this is going to start going. Okay? Jacob commits that anyone who steals these idols is going to die. He should have just shut up. Why'd he got to say anything? And he's safe. Why would he now volunteer for somebody to be hurt? It's interesting because this foolish commitment foreshadows something else that's going to happen in a few chapters. You see, there's going to be a famine, and Jacob's sons are going to go down to Egypt to get grain. Without knowing it, Joseph is going to be in charge down there. Okay, and as Joseph is trying to reestablish relationships with his brothers and with his dad and everything else, but he's trying to figure out, can he trust them again? He's going to put a silver cup into one of their bags, into actually Benjamin's bag. Okay? And then he's going to send a servant out to catch up to the brothers as they're leaving, and he's going to say, why did you take the head guy's silver cup? And the brothers are going to say, no way, we didn't take it, and you can kill the one who you find it with. And so Jacob's commitment, his rash commitment here, without knowing it, he's putting his most beloved wife on the chopping block. And in years from now, his sons are going to put his most beloved remaining son on the chopping block as well. It's a really interesting foreshadowing of what's going to happen and how stupid this is. He's basically condemning his beloved Rachel for taking the idols that he doesn't know about. Okay? And his sons, without knowing it, are going to potentially condemn Jacob's favorite remaining son. By speaking so quickly and with condemnation, Jacob, not only those things, Jacob has denied Rachel the opportunity to confess. See, Rachel can't confess now that I've taken him, when she knows it's going to mean her death. He's put her in a position where she has to continue to deceive her father. If you think about it, Jacob has essentially been deceived by Rachel now too. And Rachel is a deceiver, just like her husband and just like her dad. Isn't it interesting how we see these things going around? You know, what goes around comes around, right? Not only that, what we're going to find later in chapter 35 is that Rachel does indeed die on the trip back. She never makes it all the way back to Bethlehem and Hebron. Okay, it's as if Jacob's rash promise is taken up. Rachel is just flat out lied to her dad. Okay. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 33. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two maids, but he did not find them, that is, his idols. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Verse 34. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle, and she sat on them. And Laban felt through all the tent, but did not find them. She said to her father, Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is upon me. So he searched, but he did not find the household idols. Because Rachel is now lying and deceiving her father. It's really interesting because it's not all that different than what Jacob did to Isaac 20 years ago, is it? Jacob deceived his father to get the blessing. Okay, here Rachel's deceiving her father so she can live and keep the idols. Rachel is showing herself to be a deceiver, just like Jacob and Laban. Verse 36. Then Jacob became angry and contended with Laban and said to Laban, Where is my transgression? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? He's getting all indignant, isn't he? Right? He's saying, You've accused me and you haven't found a thing yet. Okay? He's saying, Your accusations are false. And Jacob demands to know why Laban has hotly pursued them with such evil intent. Okay? However, what has Jacob forgotten? That he snuck off. And these are Laban's grandkids and Laban's daughters. I'm
curious though. I know he said it's not right, it's not nice just to leave and not tell him. But doesn't Jacob have the right to take his family wherever he wants?
Again, it has to do with, how, not just doing something.
Right. It's how he did it. He did it in secret.
That's right. He really has. While Laban may be more concerned about the herds and certainly the idols, okay, Jacob did deny not just Laban the opportunity to say goodbye, but his wives and his sons the opportunity to say goodbye to their grandfather. Verse 37, Though you have felt through all my goods, what have you found of all your household goods? In other words, nothing. Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between the two of us. That's an interesting thing, this whole confrontation. On the surface, we can readily relate to Jacob's anger with Laban. Jacob suggests that Laban's men will even be able to judge between the two of them, and that they'll judge in favor of Jacob. And maybe the men really are that, they have that high a level of integrity. Okay, yet they are, Laban's kinsmen. I'm not so sure that I would take that bet, quite frankly, if I was Jacob. Okay, but we do understand it. Yet Jacob's wrong. The idols were stolen by Rachel. What we see in this confrontation here between these two men is that, there's not a lot of difference really between Laban and Jacob, is there? We think we're innocent in so many cases, in so many situations. And I think one of the things that we read from, or we learn from this message, is we should be careful when we judge our own innocence. See, that's what Jacob is doing. He's judging his own motives and his own intentions. He knows that he's got some parts are right, but in his camp there really is stuff that's Laban, and he really has left in a problematic way. Okay, he's judging his own innocence, and we're each guilty of doing that so many times. We judge ourselves based on our intentions, and we don't even realize that often we've hurt others, and we don't know anything about it. But we think we're innocent because we really don't know what we don't know. And that's what Jacob's here. He doesn't really recognize that he has behaved deceitfully to Laban, and he doesn't realize that he really does have the Laban's property on him, even if they're stupid little idols. I don't know about you, but this is something God has been working on in me for a while. Verse 38. Jacob continues, these 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your and your female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten the rams of your flocks. Verse 39. That which was torn of beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. You required it of my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Jacob's going to start talking about what it's like being a shepherd. And he says, hey, I've done this for 20 years for you. That's by the way how long it's been since he left home. He has been home in 20 years. And shepherding is indeed a very difficult life. You can't have the animals in and around the camp. They got to be away and they have to be constantly moving because they're looking for ground to eat. They're looking for water. They have to be taken care of. When you've got that many of them, you can't be protecting all of them. So, there's ones that the other animals get to and tear them up. And Jacob says, look, I didn't come to you and say, hey, this went bad or that went bad. I bore that loss myself. Okay. I didn't even talk to you about it. Okay. He goes on, he's saying verse 40, thus I was by day, the heat consumed me, the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. Well, why was that? Because he's always up watching the sheep and the goats and everything else. He's watching for predators. He's watching to make sure they don't get lost. It's a tough life. Verse 41. These 20 years I have been in your house. I have served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, had not been for me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night. Jacob's response to Laban's accusations is to accuse Laban, but it's not really accusations per se. It's true. It's facts. He says, "You want to accuse me? Here's some facts. You cheated me left and right. You've been so bad to me that if it weren't for God, you've been so bad to me. If it wasn't for God, you'd have taken everything and left me for naught." In the end, Jacob essentially has gotten it right. If not for God, Laban would have somehow cheated Jacob out of everything and sent him home without his family and without his earnings. After all this, it's remarkable to see Jacob still refer to God as the God of his fathers, but not as his own God. And it's not that Jacob hasn't seen God move in his life. And it's not as if he doesn't realize it's been God that's been protecting him, because he's acknowledged it. Again, we see how hard it is for the non-believing heart to fully accept God for who he is and what he's done. You guys have a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Let's try to finish up this chapter. Verse 43. Then Laban replies to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do to this day for my daughters, or to my children whom they have borne?" Verse 44. So now let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between the two of us. Whoa. What attitude is that? The daughters are mine. I gave them to you in wedlock. The daughters are mine. They bore children to you, but they're my children, and all the herds are mine. Now we see the real Laban. You know, you've probably seen or heard this attitude before. Abusers often take this stance to justify their actions. It was all mine in the first place. His defense to Jacob's accusations of his poor treatment of Jacob is simply to say, well, it was mine anyway. I had the right to do that. In other words, he's telling Jacob, I have all the rights, you have none. And right here we see why it was okay in Jacob's mind to cheat, why it was okay in Laban's mind to cheat Jacob. Because Jacob had no rights. It's all Laban. It's also interesting that at the end of this, notice at the very end of what he says, that this is, everything is mine, but what can I do to it? What can I do? This day to these my daughters and the children whom they have borne. What's he really saying? He's saying God is unfair. God is cheating me. See, this is all mine, but God won't let me have it back. The very God that has prospered Jacob, the very God that he fears, is wrong and unfair. Everybody's against me. We see here Laban's real nature. And the shame of it is, the worst part of it is, the whole world is full of Labans. 44. So now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. Laban knows he can't defeat God, and so he recommends a truce because he's got no other option. Basically, it's a no-fault solution. He's not going to acknowledge any wrongdoing, okay? But he doesn't want to, do anything to recompense. He's not going to admit anything, and he's not going to demand Jacob to do it. So it's basically a no-fault, okay? And it's interesting because when Laban makes this offer of a truce, we see that God actually, warning of Laban in a dream, protected both Laban and Jacob. Because if Laban tries to hurt Jacob, what's God going to do?
Smoke him.
Yipper. Then Jacob, verse 45. Then Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, just like he did when he was leaving the promised land. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Now some people think there's actually two heaps: a pillar that Jacob sets up, and a pile of stones that Laban and his men set up, and that may very well be true. Okay, but either way they do this. In verse 47, Laban called it Yegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. In either language, it's the same thing. It's a heap of witness. It's basically a monument. One is just the Aramaic, that's what Laban calls it, and Jacob calls it in the Hebrew. Okay, but it's the same. They both have the same name for it. It's a witness. Okay. Laban said, verse 48, this heap is a witness before me and you this day. Therefore it was named Gilead. And Mitzpah, verse 49. He said, for may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from each other. Mitzpah means watchtower or watch. Why do they refer to it as a watchtower? Because they spent 20 years trying to cheat each other and to deceive each other and get the upper hand. You know, this is a terrible commentary on a family that has no God, that's just completely lost. Look where it's ending up. Verse 50, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, no man was with us. Although no man is with us, see, God is a witness between you and me. What's he doing? Well, he's really threatening Jacob. But he doesn't even know God. How can he do this? I mean, it's just interesting that he says, hey, if you mistreat my daughters, and yet the daughters have admitted that he's mistreated them. And he gave them the extra maids, and now he's accusing Jacob of all this stuff. It's really, when you think about it, it is not a surprise how all of this turns out. When you think about the men that are involved here, and maybe even Rachel, and don't forget all of the hostility between Rachel and her sister. You know, this is the price of deceit. This is what it costs us. This is where it turns out. Verse 52, this heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness that I will not pass by this heap to harm you, and you will not pass by this heap and this pillar to me for harm. Why is he saying this? Because they don't trust each other. He's saying, I won't come south looking for you to harm you. Don't you come north looking to harm me. Verse 53, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Now, while we've already kind of suspected this and figured it out, verse 53 is another one of those. This is, 53 is kind of another one of those big clues. Notice Laban is speaking here. He's saying, hey, this heap's a witness. Don't you come north. I won't come south. And he goes on to say, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father. Who was Nahor? Laban's dad. It's all the way back in chapter 11, verse 27. Nahor and Abraham are brothers, right? And Nahor's son Terah is the father of Abram and Nahor, and Haran is the other one. Remember, Haran's the one that dies, and it's his son is Lot. Okay, what Laban is doing is he's referring to the God of Abraham and Nahor, and it's pretty clear here that Laban and Nahor do not have the same God that Abraham was called away to serve. So when we read all the way back in chapter 12, where God called Abraham out of Ur of Chaldees, and we said it was a place of idolatry and false gods and everything else, we basically see here that Laban is confirming that that is exactly the case, and that his branch of the family is continued to worship all these gods. And so he makes this vow by the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor. He's a polytheist. He could care less how many gods there are out there. But Jacob, to his credit, swears by the fear of his father Isaac. Who did Isaac fear? God. It is interesting that once again, God doesn't acknowledge, that Jacob doesn't acknowledge God as his God. It's as he acknowledges him as the God of his father. Well, we continue on. Verse 55. Early in the morning, and so Jacob makes a sacrifice on the mountain. They have a meal. They kind of make up, so on and so forth. Verse 55. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And then Laban departed and returned to his place. This is how it ends. Laban kisses his daughters and his grandkids for the last time. He's never going to be heard from again in the Bible. He departs, and indeed, it's the end of this period of Jacob's life. It's the end of this period of Laban's life. You're never going to see him again. Okay, but it's also an end of a period in the sense that the children of Israel, the children, the descendants of Abraham, through Isaac and Jacob, will never again have a relationship with this part of the family up in Padan Aram. The descendants of Abraham will never again look for wives from this branch of the family, and in fact, they're going to become enemies over time. And what does Laban walk away with after all of this? Nothing more than what he came with.
Yeah.
He got nothing. God did exactly what he said he would. He protected him. See, God has now promised Jacob that he will inherit the covenant promises given to Abraham, that his descendants will be like the dust of the earth. God would not leave him. God has kept him safe in 20 years of shepherding. God would bring him back to the promised land. God has given him the 11 sons. God has protected Jacob from Laban's attempts to cheat him again and again and to harm him. God has made Jacob wealthy. But notice the contrast between God's faithfulness and the blessings to Jacob's and the blessings that he's given to Jacob, and Jacob's repeated pattern of deceitfulness and his lack of full trust in God. And what we see here is also a final statement around, at some point, eventually, if we're going to follow God, we have to separate from those who don't follow God. We could be in the world, but we can't be of the world. And that's what God is doing, is he's taken Jacob and he's bringing him back to the promised land. Because at this point, he can't allow Laban to continue, and the rest of his family, to continue to be such a bad influence on Jacob. He's got to get Jacob away from these guys. And this is a message to us too. Okay? God told us, don't be equally yoked. There comes a time when you have to separate from those, from those who don't believe in God, those who believe in other things. And notice that the separation is complete. God has used Jacob to reveal himself to Laban, and Laban hasn't gotten it. And so now it's time to separate. This is a really sad story, but we see these changes starting to happen. God is saying to Jacob, I'm not done with you. I'm bringing it back to the promised land, okay? And I can't have you be around Laban. And so it's time. And it's important to keep that in mind in our lives, that, you know, we need to be faithful to represent God to others. But there will come times when God will bring those people out of our lives. Now, maybe he'll allow them to come back for some reason or something like that. But at some point, he may bring people in and out of our lives, and it is a part of life. But he does it for his purposes, and he does it for us as well. All right. Well, there's a lot here in this chapter. And like I say, by the time we're done, we see, once again, God is right in his assessment of Laban. And that Laban really did mean all these things for evil. And that Laban really was not a believer in God. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts that you guys have? Any questions?
No, I'm on mute because the dog is crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry we went so long. Thanks for your patience. Anything? Okay. All right. Who wants to close in prayer? All right. Well, Father, we're grateful that you've never left us, and you've always been there for us. You've always protected us, whether we realized it or not. You've been there all along, working in the background, providing for us, providentially caring for us, paving the way for us, that we might return to you, and that ultimately we might be with you in the promised land. And we look forward to that time in eternity. But Father, we do also pray that that you would keep us from being of the world, that while you have us in the world, that you would use us in a mighty way to represent you to others. And we pray, Father, that many, many, many would come to know you, and that there would be a great awakening and revival in this land. And we pray all these things in your Son Jesus' blessed name. Amen.
Thank you, Eric.